Hey everyone, Mr. Foster here. Sorry about the schedule change for today. I have to leave to go out of town after our class on Friday. This afternoon slash evening, I had to just basically run some errands and get some things taken care of that I was going to do on Friday, but now I don't have time to. For today, we need to talk about basically chapters 20 through chapters 30 of The Awakening, right? In these chapters, we really get a lot of development from Edna, right? What we see here within these chapters, Robert and Leonce are both gone, right? Leonce is there at the start of this section, but he eventually leaves on some more business, right? And we see a lot of interaction between Edna and Madame Rise, the old piano player lady, right? We actually get quite a few scenes involving the two of them, right? So we're just going to kind of go through, and I don't want to make this too long, but we're going to make sure that we talk just about some of the points with chapters basically 21 through 30, and then we will finish out the book on in class on Friday, right? This is a format that I generally do when I teach an online class, right? I know obviously our class is not online, but I think if I ever have to miss a day or something like that, something like this is still helpful, just so I can still kind of talk to you all about some of the stuff that I want you to take away from the chapters that we're reading, right? So starting in chapter 21, we have Edna visiting Madame Rise, right? And this is kind of an important scene between these two characters, because as we're looking at this, we see a lot of kind of like spiciness, for lack of a better term, right, developing within Edna. So we know that Madame Rise has this kind of reputation as being like this, grumpy, disagreeable old lady. But we see in chapter 21, when Edna visits Madame Rise, that Edna is really able to kind of hold her own and stand her ground against Madame Rise's kind of bitter attitude, right? And this gains respect from Madame Rise, right? From where Edna kind of stands up to her and says, because we learn in this chapter that Robert has been writing to Madame Rise of all people and asking about Edna, right? So Madame Rise kind of messes up and says, "Oh, Edna, yeah, Robert has been writing to me." And Edna's like, "Let me read the letter, right? Let me read it." And she's like, "No." Madame Rise says something about a letter is only meant to be read by the person who writes it and the person that it's delivered to, right? Or the person it's addressed to. But eventually, this persistence in this courageous soul of Edna's wins out here, and Madame Rise says, "Okay, the letter is upstairs in the room, go read it." And so Edna goes and reads it, and Madame Rise says, "Oh, Robert has been in these letters that Robert is addressing to Madame Rise, he's asking all about Edna, right?" And Edna's like, "Well, why is he writing you and not me?" So on and so on, right? So we see that as Edna leaves, Madame Rise goes back up and discovers the letter and says that it's like damp or covered with tears, right? So obviously Edna cries over this letter and cries and gets tears all over it. Chapter 22 is a pretty, for lack of a better term, misogynistic chapter, right? But I think it is. I think Chopin is being a little bit humorous here and kind of poking fun at how ignorant men can be, right? So in chapter 22, we get Leonce, Mr. Pontellier, going to see like their family doctor or physician or whatever. He goes and visits him on his property, and they say a lot of really, kind of concerning misogynistic stuff about women in this interaction, right? But where we don't like Leonce because we know what kind of man he is, I think the old doctor here we can cut the old doctor a little bit of slack because he is wise, right? Um, and this chapter ends with the doctor, like Leonce leaves, and he comes to the doctor and he's like, I'm worried about my wife, I'm worried about Edna. And the doctor's like, oh, I thought you were here to talk about yourself, but you're here to talk about your wife. And they say some pretty silly stuff, right? um, the doctor has to explain to Leonce that not all women are alike. um, and he asks if Edna has been hanging out with these pseudo intellectual women, all this kind of stuff. um, Leonce makes a comment where he says, Edna is made of this sound Presbyterian Kentucky stock, right? So he's like, I don't understand why she's acting the way she is, right? The doctor calls women a peculiar organism, right? But anyway, the conversation doesn't really go anywhere, and Leonce leaves. And as Leonce is walking away, the doctor's like, does he not even think about there being another man in the picture, right? That's one of the closing lines of chapter 22, where our doctor says, like, he's kind of like dumbfounded that because he's picking up on this very, very easily, right? He's like, well, Leonce, like in his head, he doesn't actually say this to Leonce, but in his head, he's like, maybe the reason why your wife is acting so funny is there's probably another man in the picture, right? Which obviously there is. It's Robert, that we soon come to see here in the next couple of chapters. Edna really confessing her feelings for Robert, right? But Leonce is just completely clueless to all this, right? He has no idea, right? But the doctor picks up on it pretty quickly, right? He's like, well, obviously there's probably another man in the picture, even though he doesn't actually. He realizes this, but doesn't say anything to Leonce about it, right? So that's chapter 22. So chapter 23, we get a little bit of interaction between Edna and her father. We learn some more about her father. In chapter 23, they're at kind of like this little party or soiree where there are other men, and Edna like makes some observations here where she's like, yeah, there are these other men here, but they don't really do anything for me, right? We see her, right, more developing of like at this point in the novel, we can argue that maybe Edna thinks that she knows what she wants, but she is still kind of doing a lot of flip-flopping, right? But that is a perfectly fine thing for her to be doing, right? Because what we're really talking about here is Edna kind of getting all of this personal self-development that was like never given to her, right? This kind of like stunted development that she never really got to explore. Now at the age of 28, right, after all this stuff has happened with her life, she's kind of realizing that, hey, my life doesn't have to be the way that it is, right? And so she's having this self-discovery and self-development in herself that was denied to her, right? This was stuff that she was not able to experience because of the way that her life had gone on to this point, right? But now that she's realizing about herself, kind of thanks to Robert and thanks to other things that are happening, that her life doesn't really have to keep going on the way that it has been, right? She can make changes here. So in chapter 23, we get a line where Edna admits that, if she's left alone with Leonce, you can meet my cat if you want to. This is Turbo. Say hi, Turbo. Whenever I film these, sometimes she'll interrupt. Bye. All right, so chapter 23, we get the line about Edna admitting that her and Leonce have like really nothing in common, right? We get this story that she tells to her company, right? So the doctor and the colonel and her dad, like all these people are there and they're all telling stories. And Edna tells a story. She might be a little bit tipsy. She might be a little drunk when she tells this. But her story, Chopin calls it a story of pure invention. It's about these two lovers who run away and they're never seen again. So obviously, right, something is on Edna's mind, and it's not Leonce, right? The doctor is here, and he hears this story that Edna tells, and the only thing, like, the chapter 23 closes, and this is a character that we mentioned earlier in the novel, and he's kind of coming back into the picture now. But chapter 23 closes with the doctor, after he listens to Edna's story, right? He says he hopes that it could be whoever, whatever man, but he just hopes it's not Erebon, right? Elise Erebon. So Erebon is a character that we'll see quite a bit more of in the coming chapters, right? So in chapter 24, we get some interaction between Mr. Pontellier, right, Leonce, and Edna's father, where like Edna's sister Margaret, I think is her name, is getting married, right? And we learn that Edna just has no interest in whatsoever in going to this wedding, right? So her family is obviously upset about this, right? And her father comes over to Leonce and says, "Why are you letting your wife act this way?" Right? He's like, and we get some more very misogynistic, language here, where he's like, this is not how you should let your wife act. You should be like keeping her on basically like a shorter leash and telling her what she needs to do and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, Leonce leaves and goes and travels again. I think he takes the children with him. And Edna gets to eat dinner alone with her doggy, right? So this is an important thing here at the end of chapter 24, where we get to see, for like one of the first times in the novel, what happens when Edna can do whatever she wants, right? At this point in the novel, Robert's gone, Leonce is gone, and Edna's kind of just left her own devices, and she can do whatever she wants, right? So that's kind of the way chapter 24 ends. Chapter 25 begins with this passage talking about how Edna can only work when the sun is out. I want you, as we talked about in class, when we talk about like the themes and the motifs and stuff, another theme or a motif you can add to your list, right, is Edna's relationship with the sun, right? How does Chopin write about Edna, and how does she compare her, or kind of like pair her up with the imagery of the sun, right? And how does that go, right? So anyway, the weather has turned rainy. Edna is like, oh, the rain is kind of bringing me down. She thinks about how life is passing her by. She decides later that remember that Edna's from Kentucky, and obviously that is like the home of the Kentucky Derby. They are very big on their horses and horse racing over in Kentucky, right? So they're going to the racetrack, and Edna is there with a new character, Mrs. Highcamp and Elise Erebon, right? Erebon's not new, but this is like our first time really getting to see him in action in the novel. And as soon as we see him, he's kind of similar to Robert, but he's a little bit more, maybe he's slightly more refined than Robert is, right? But he's also kind of like a ladies' man, a player. And this is the character that the doctor at the end of chapter 23 says, if Edna is thinking about another man, he just hopes and prays that it's not Erebon. And who shows up? Right, obviously Erebon, right? So he is at the horse race track with Miss Highcamp and Edna, and they're watching the races. And Edna uses her knowledge, right, to basically win money on placing bets on the races, because she knows a lot about horse racing. She knows a lot about horses because she's from Kentucky, right? So anyway, we get this line, right? Edna says that she just wants something. She wants something to do. She just needs something to go on, right? Something to happen. It doesn't take very long for Erebon to get Edna alone and make a move on her. And I want you to notice how, at first, right, she literally says to Erebon as he's trying to make a move, she says, "I don't like you," right? She says, "I don't like you." So she rejects him at the end of chapter 25. we get this really funny line where it says, Erebon is so genuine that he even deceives himself sometimes, right? Which is kind of a funny line. Anyway, it doesn't take long. Chapter 26, we see Erebon working his way in, moving closer to Edna, right? And right, he's trying to make his move, right? Her husband's out of town. Robert's not in the picture, so he's like, I'm gonna make my move on Edna, right? So we get this really really good line that talks about this animal inside of Edna that stirs restlessly, right? This animal that is within her that is stirring restlessly. So once again, we get another scene where Edna visits Madame Rise, right? Mademoiselle Rise. And Mademoiselle offers her some brandy, and I like this little detail where it says that Edna drinks it from a glass like a man, right? We see her, I love seeing Edna in these moments where she is just herself, right? Where she just lets her hair down. She's not trying to put on any kind of facade for anyone. She just is acting naturally, right? And we see that here where she just drinks the brandy from a glass like a man, right? As it says here in chapter 26. We get the first mention here that Edna says that she wants to leave the house that she's been living in and move into her own smaller place, right? With her own money. That is important, right? She talks to Mademoiselle Rise here in chapter 26 about, she says the big house is too much upkeep, and also everything in it, in the house itself, is paid for by Leonce, right? She wants something of her own that she is paying for with her own money, right? So she doesn't really work, but she does make money betting on the horse track races and selling her paintings now. She's selling some of her paintings. And she gets a little bit of money from her family as well. She admits that, right? But she's like, I want to get something with my own money, and that's where I want to live, right? So we get more talks about, with Edna and Mademoiselle Rise, that Edna says that she will like the feeling of freedom and independence of having her own place. She says she hasn't told Leonce about this, obviously. We get a very important line here where Edna says, or she thinks this to herself, she wishes to never again belong to anyone but herself, right? So that's kind of the point that we're at with her development, right? She says she never wants to belong to anyone but herself, right? We get news. Mademoiselle says that we got a new letter from Robert, right? And she's like, Edna, Robert is obviously in love with you. She's like, this guy loves you, right? And the letter says, Robert's new letter to Mademoiselle Rise says that he's coming back, right? And this makes Edna super excited, right? She's super excited that Robert is coming back. They talk a little bit more. Mademoiselle Rise kind of opens up and says, if I were young and in love again, blah, blah, blah. They talk about how they should pick men, right? I really like these interactions between Edna and Mademoiselle Rise, right? So they talk a little bit about like what they should look for when they pick a man, right? If it's his money, if it's his job, if it's his looks, right? What should they look for when they pick a man? And then Edna finally here, towards the end of chapter 26, admits that she is in love with Robert, right? It says that this is her first time she admits it to herself. Mademoiselle Rise questions Edna. She's like, well, why do you love Robert? And Edna just starts like listing off reasons. And Mademoiselle Rise is like, you love him because you love him, right? But also, I want you to see something out of this chapter is how do men in this novel affect the way Edna feels, right? What kind of like power do these men have over Edna and her emotions, right? Does she fully like stay independent of them, or do her emotions change depending on how these men interact with her, basically, right? So anyway, chapter 27 is where we cut to a different scene at the start of 27 where Erebon and Edna are just kind of lounging around. And one thing that I always found kind of confusing about this chapter is we get to see at the end of 26 how excited that Edna is about Robert coming back. And she admits that she loves Robert, but then the very next chapter, it starts with her basically, canoodling with Erebon, right? So, for lack of a better term, right? We get here another kind of admission from Edna where she says she doesn't know what kind of character of woman she is. And Erebon's like, I can tell you what kind of woman you are. And Edna says something, or one of them says something about being like a devilishly wicked example of the species, right? I think it's Edna that says that. I really like this interesting detail that we get where Edna starts talking to Erebon about Mademoiselle Rise, right? And he's like, I'm jealous that you're talking about her so much while you're here with me, right? But we get this nice little this mention where Mademoiselle Rise hugs Edna and feels her back and checks for her wings, right? She's like, I want to see if you have your wings yet because I want you to soar, right? I want you to be able to soar and fly. And then Erebon asks Edna, he's like, well, if you're soaring, where would you go to, right? Long story short, they end up making out, doing whatever else. We don't know. The chapter ends, right? So anyway, Erebon gets what he wants. And we see, does Edna also get what she wants? The entire time, did she also want to hook up with Erebon? Was that something that she wanted to do this whole time? Anyway, this is consensual, right? They both want this. And that's how chapter 27 ends, right? Chapter 28 is super short, right? It is Edna's kind of like emotional reaction and her reasoning after Erebon leaves, right? Edna reckoning with her emotions between essentially three men, right? So at this point in the novel, this super, super short chapter 28, what I want you to be thinking about is we essentially have a love square, I guess at this point, right? We have Edna, and then Robert, Leonce, and Erebon, right? So what do these three different men represent to Edna, right? What are these men? How do they function within Edna's psyche, right? What do they represent to her? And that would be probably the easiest way to sum up chapter 28. Is Edna, now that there are three men in the picture, she's having to kind of figure out, well, what am I going to do now, right? There's these three men. There's her, right? Herself. How is she going to navigate this kind of new territory that she's in, right? 29. This is where we get Edna moving into her new abode, as she calls it, and she calls it the Pigeon House, right? Kind of a funny name. Anyway, Edna has moved into her pigeon house, and we see Erebon visit her as she's moving in, right? And he just kind of like lets himself in, and I really, really like this interaction. Where Erebon first comes to the pigeon house and he sees Edna up on like the stool trying to like hang something or whatever. So she basically kind of ignores him and just keeps like working on what she's doing when he walks in. And he's like, hey, stop doing that. Basically the classic of like, oh, well, you're a woman. You shouldn't be doing that. Let me do it for you instead, right? And I love Edna's reaction because she basically ignores him at first. And then she tells him to like shut up and go away and go do something else. And then she kind of just starts bossing him around and says, okay, well, since you're here, do this, this, and this for me, right? And Erebon being the kind of, the rogue that he is, because, he wants to stay on Edna's good side, right? So he's like, yeah, whatever, I'll do whatever you ask while I'm here. I'll do some work for you. And the chapter ends with Erebon saying, well, when will I see you again? Like, I came over, I helped you out. When will I see you again, right? I want to see you again as soon as possible. And Edna's like, well, I'll see you at the dinner party, of course, right? So this is kind of like a central point in the novel here from 29 into chapter 30, where we see this dinner party that Edna hosts, right? And we have most of our cast. There's a few people in the cast that are not here for like logistical reasons, but a good portion of our cast is here at this party, right? And there's not a whole lot that goes on here. One thing I want to mention is where this is something that you can kind of figure out what you want to do with. But remember, Edna's told Mademoiselle Rise that she wants to move in to her new place, the Pigeon House, because she wants to have stuff that is hers, right? That she's paying for, that is her property, her belongings, all that kind of stuff, because she says, everything at the big house, the big house that she was living in, was all Leonce's, right? All the stuff inside of it, the house itself, it was all paid by him, right? But at the end of chapter 29, Edna says this quote to Erebon, where she says, "I'll let Leonce pay the bills for like this party or whatever," right? So this is where we can ask ourselves a question of, and this is where a lot of people who want to be critical of this novel, and specifically critical of Edna, come in to say, you can look at it on one hand of, Edna is going through all of this self-discovery. She's doing what she wants, doing, kind of having that girl boss power and everything. But then the critics of that say, well, is Edna just really selfish? Right? That's the common criticism that they throw. A lot of critics or people that don't like this book say they don't like Edna because of that fact, that she just kind of does what she pleases, doesn't care kind of about the consequences of how it could affect others, right? So that is a question you might have to ask, right? Are her actions selfish, or are they justified, right? So not really a whole lot to say about chapter 30. Really not a whole lot moves forward in the plot. But I think the purpose of chapter 30 is just showing how Edna is like reveling, you could say, in this new life that she is living, her new independent life. So not a whole lot happens in chapter 30 as far as like moving the plot forward, but I think the purpose of it is to show us this is Edna's life now, right? She's doing what she wants. She's not beholden to like any other person beside herself, especially not a man, right? If she wants a man around, then she'll keep him around. If she doesn't want him around, she'll tell him to leave. But we still have the Robert question to deal with, right? Because Robert mentioned he's going to return, right? He's got to come back. So what do we do now that Erebon and Edna are kind of having a thing? Leonce is obviously still her husband, but Robert is supposedly the one that she is in love with, right? So what I want you to do for Friday, there's only about 9 chapters left, so finish out the novel. We'll talk about the remaining chapters on Friday, and then we'll go from there. This weekend, or by Monday, I will try to have a new schedule put together to reflect kind of where we're at and have new updated dates on it. Because we still need to do our 2 exams. We still need to, our 3 exams. We still need to do those exams at some point. And we need to get our literary analysis essays going, right? So just hang tight. Let's finish The Awakening. And then I will kind of go back to the drawing board and get our schedule re-put back together to where we're on track, right? And we'll go from there. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope it kind of, I know that we weren't able to meet today because I had to do some other stuff this afternoon. But hopefully this video will still help us stay on track. And then when we come back on Friday in class, we can finish out The Awakening and go from there. All right, so thank you for watching, and I will see you on Friday.